Made with Love by Indigrow.
Hi everyone. So today we're joined by Elizabeth Keyton, or better known as Eli Kuti. She is an American who learns and teaches Malayalam. Eliza, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really lovely chatting with you. Of course, we've spoken to you before, but for some of our community who may not know much about you, do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself?
Yes, so I'm Eliza, and yes, on Instagram, I'm Elikutti, and I grew up in the States, but when I moved to the UAE, I met my husband, and he is from Kerala, and I started learning Malayalam, and I found out that there isn't as many resources there for Malayalam, so I started making them on my own. Parallel to that, I'm an educator, English teacher, educational manager, so I've been teaching for quite a while now, since 2009, and I've worked across South Korea, the UAE, Vietnam, and I'm currently in India because I just gave birth 3 months ago. So a lot of exciting things going on in our lives right now.
A lot about names and things like that on our community channel, and one of the things that really struck us was the beautiful name that you've chosen for your little one, and we just wanted to kind of like ask you a little bit more about what was the thought process when you were choosing your name, and how did it come about, and yeah, if you could share a little bit more about that.
Sure. So in 2019, it actually started because there was an up-and-coming musician with the name Arava. And I remember watching his video, hearing his name, and I was like, "Oh, Arjun, do you know this name Arava?" He's like, "Oh, yes, that means knowledge." And it's a Dravidian word, so that means you find it in Tamil and in Malayalam. It has that shared root, and it doesn't have Sanskritic influence. It's an old name, an old word. And I thought that was really neat. And it kind of just stuck it in the back of my head. And then when we found out we were expecting, we started making the name list, like if it's a boy and if it's a girl. And, I just was really stuck on Arva. I was like, this is a really nice name. It has a really nice meaning, for knowledge. And we wanted like a pure Malayalam name, like a Dravidian name for our child, so that, he has those roots. And it was interesting because, of course, we were involving his family in the process, and they were suggesting other names. They weren't quite sure about it because it's not a common name. And so, they were used to the more traditional names, I guess you could say. Like, Arjun's name is extremely common, and his brother Gokul, and these types of names. And, I was kind of really digging in my heels, not only because Arava itself is a beautiful name and its meaning, but also coming from a multicultural background for my family and for living in the States, there's the option to go by Adi, and, it's a very approachable name, and it's a very easy to understand, easy to pronounce name as well. And then what's really is that Arjun was talking with his friends, and even though officially his name is Arava, the name that we gave him on his naming ceremony on the 28th day, which we do here in Kerala, he chose the name Arivaragan. So this Aragan is this additional part, which means beauty. So you can translate that as being intelligent and handsome, or having the beauty of intelligence. And so, if he chooses to have this big, strong name when he's older, he has that, and so it's a lot of different things all folded together. And I'm happy to say that after Arava arrived, and my in-laws have fallen, of course, head over heels in love with him, they've really come to love the name Arava as well. Like the more they say it, the more they see him, the more they associate that, it's really special. And so we're really happy that we were able to pick a name that, can work in any context, and it can be adapted as he wants it as he gets older. So that's basically the process behind it. And I'm really glad we stuck with it. And I'm really happy that he has that association with the performer Arava as well, because a lot of his message that he has in his music and in his work is, about breaking stereotypes, about being anti-caste, about pushing back against oppressive structures in societies. And so, there's that as well. So it's a wonderful name. It's short, but it's powerful, and we really love that.
That's amazing to hear. And it's so important when you have a little one to be able to share a little name story like the one that you shared, because you can almost visualize this conversation that you'll have with Ariva when he grows up, where it's like, Mama, how did you think about my name? And you're able to link it back right to this moment when that seed was planted in your head. And that's a very kind of empowering feeling as well for a child, because it's almost as if I always knew that you were coming, and there was this name in my head that was reserved for you.
Right. What's really funny is you hear this a lot from Indian parents, but American parents do this too. So when I was pregnant, and then we found out, because we lived in Vietnam, and in Vietnam they revealed the gender. And so when we found out we were having a boy, my mom's like, okay, I didn't tell you this, but years ago I had a dream that you would have a son. And she slowly started buying things and keeping them because she just knew. And it's so funny. And then also on the other side of things, last year I visited India. I visited Kerala, and it was our first time coming since COVID. We hadn't been there in 2 years. We came to visit, and actually, Arjun's father took us on a pilgrimage to the Mukambika temple, which is really important to him and his family. And so while we were there, I started realizing, oh, they're doing a specific puja, for hopes of having a child. And then that same year, I did, become pregnant. So it's like both sides of the family. One had a premonition, one had a prayer, and then here comes Aruva. So I think these are really sweet stories, as you said. We were already thinking of you before you existed. We were already wishing for you. So it's a very sweet sentiment.
Yeah. And tell me something, so you talked about how you wanted a name that kind of, worked in multiple situations and multiple cultures. Was that a very big concern for you? Because Aruva will be straddling multiple cultures. He will be a multicultural child in a diverse environment. How strong was that? Did that influence your decision?
It did influence it quite a bit, because there are some very beautiful names in Malayalam, and unfortunately they're written with sounds that don't exist in English. So one big example is the ra, or any dental sound like na, ra. And we were trying to decide, do we give a name with this letter and give the child the opportunity to teach people about their name? But then we're like, do we really want him to go through that every school year, every job interview, this kind of a thing? So we tried to find something that was still very much Dravidian, very much Malayalam, but also something that could be easily transferred, because yes, you want to educate others about your culture, and yes, you want to encourage people to try to learn names, try to pronounce names correctly. But if you're it can become tiring. And I know, so many kids will be like, oh, why did my parents give me this name, kind of a thing. And as they get older, they might appreciate it. But kids go through that period of time where they just want to be a part of their peer group, or they want to be, and so standing out in some ways is great and celebrated, but then standing out in other ways may not be so great. So we just want to be able to equip our child with, if Arav is too hard, you can call me Ari, fine, but not so difficult. Or maybe he does prefer Ari, or maybe he prefers Ari Varigan because it makes him feel a certain way. So I think having that flexibility is important. And most people, including myself, we don't always stick with one version of our name our entire lives. We tend to change things. My full name's Elizabeth, but I started going by Eliza, and I identify more with Eliza than Elizabeth. So it really is up to him how he decides he wants to identify and how he wants to, and that's going to be his call, and we'll give him that, because it's him, it's his identity.
So there's something interesting that you were telling us earlier about the fact that Arva has your last name. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that came to be?
So when I first met Arjun and we were talking about our families and things like that, in his background, traditionally, it was a matrilineal family society. So quite often the son or daughter would take the mother's surname. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. And I think that would be a great practice. And when I got married to Arjun, I didn't change my last name. So I was like, okay, well, how about if we have a kid, the kid can take my last name? And he's like, absolutely. And so we decided that Arjun's family name, Kandanat, would be the baby's middle name, and then the surname is Keyton, my family name. And it's really fun because it's how often can the daughter say, I passed on the family name. and here we do that. So I think that's really special, and it's going to be interesting when we go to the States and maybe someone will say, oh, are you Mr. Keyton? I was like, no, I'm Mr. Kandanat. My wife is Mrs. Keyton, you know, kind of a thing. But I like it. I like that it's different, and I like that there's this, you know, part of the culture that maybe isn't as practiced so much these days, but we're still doing it in our own way in our family.
Yeah, and I think it's a lovely mix of both cultures as well, because he's an Elizabeth Keyton. You know, he has a bit of both of you, you know, in that in the sense of your roots.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, Eliza, do you have any, like, for parents who are expecting and who are on this journey with you, where they're also trying to figure out what to name their child, what could be the few tips that you would have for them?
I definitely would say start with just you and your partner. I know, like in families, whether it's in India or whether it's in other cultures, everybody's going to have an opinion about what to name your kid. And some people will think that they don't like this name at all, or it's not a good name, or why would you choose this name? And then once you have a face to that name, you know, it changes everything, you know. And so, like, I would say work with your spouse first. If you want to get input from the family, sure, but like make a short list or make like the names that you find that, because the last thing you want to feel is that you chose a name just to make someone else happy, because you're the one with that child, you're the one giving that name and saying that name. And you know, there is such a thing as name, how is it called? It's like name remorse. Like some people name their child something and then after about a few weeks they're like, oh no. And you know what, that's fine. If you decide once your baby comes they don't look like this, maybe we should name them this, like that's fine too. Like a name doesn't have to be, some people feel so much pressure, you know, like, oh, we have to pick a name, the baby's going to be born soon. Like don't rush into a name either, you have time. I like that in a lot of Indian cultures there is this idea of a naming ceremony after the baby is born, because you know, that gives you some time to really look and think and choose, and I think that's really great. So yeah, just talk with your spouse, your partner, and decide on a few things before reaching out to others, and also don't rush into a decision. We're really fortunate that, you know, I had that one name in my mind for so long, and you know, my husband was very much on board with it. And even though initially the family wasn't too excited about it, now they really, really love it because they love him. So, and it takes on a whole meaning once he's here.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Eliza, for sharing your time with us. It was really lovely to hear how you came about with the name. And like you said, it's a beautiful, beautiful name. And we're just wishing you and your family the very best.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great talking with you.
I hope you enjoyed this video. Visit us at indigrowkids.com for more.